What is good, streaming people? Tommy Tran here in our CBS Sports HQ studios in Florida, getting you ready for the 2020 NFL Draft. Yes, we just got into November of 2019, but it's never too early to talk about what college players would make good fits for all 32 NFL teams. Coming up, we'll mock up the entire first round, including the Colts possibly finding their next Andrew Luck. Who's the first wide receiver taken in the draft? It's going to be Jeudy or Ceedee Lamb we'll discuss. And if you've got the top pick, are we tanking for Tua, bombing for Burrow, or even going forever young with Chase? Let's welcome in Ryan Wilson, NFL writer, Pick 6 pod contributor, and CBS Sports HQ's draft analyst. We're going to go through the entire first round, starting with the 32nd overall pick. And we look at 32 to 23, Ryan. This was a little bit more up-tempo. We'll go a little air raid here with the last 10 picks. What stands out to you about 32 to 23?
Well, we'll start at the bottom at 32 there, Tommy T. We have Tyler Johnson out of Minnesota. He's a big slot receiver at 6'2". And yes, they just traded for Manny Sanders. Yes, they have Deebo Samuel, their second-round pick last year, but Tyler Johnson is a contested catch master. Put him in the middle of the field. He reminds me a lot of Juju Smith-Schuster. I would imagine that would appeal to Kyle Shanahan. Prince Tagovailoa would feel obviously a need at left tackle. He's an athletic left tackle there. Isaiah Wynn can't stay healthy. Henry Ruggs at 30 really intrigues me, Tommy, because he is without question the fastest person on the Alabama roster, maybe the fastest person in the college football. Replace Ted Ginn with Henry Ruggs. Throw in Michael Thomas opposite him, and that's a lot of trouble for the NFC South. Neville Gallimore obviously fills the need in the middle of that defense for Baltimore, an athletic defensive tackle out of Oklahoma. Xavier McKinney. Last year we talked a lot about Deontay Thompson as being the guy in the back of that Alabama defense at safety. Xavier McKinney is a faster, more explosive player. Would fill a need there in the back end with Marquise Blair, the second-round pick this year. Kenneth Murray, middle linebacker out of Oklahoma. We've been talking in recent years about how bad Oklahoma's defense is. They're going to have two guys in the first round of this latest mock draft. He's an athletic sideline-to-sideline guy. Yetiro Gross-Matos out of Penn State, another super athlete who is only going to get better as he grows into the role. And a guy I really love in this draft out of Colorado at 25 there, Tommy, going to the Dolphins with their third first-round pick, Laviska Shenault Jr. Had a huge game 10 days ago against USC, caught 172 passing yards for a touchdown. You can line him up anywhere on the field, even at quarterback, and he is a playmaker. He reminds me a little bit of N'Keal Harry, but better. Last year's first-round pick to the Patriots, and then we see Alex Leatherwood, an Alabama offensive lineman, no surprise there, going to Kansas City, and finally Javon Kinlaw, one of the best pass rushing interior linemen in this draft out of South Carolina, and he goes to Minnesota, Tommy T.
All right, that's 32 to 23, and I'm with you at 25. Laviska Shenault, a couple of Pac-12 guys. You have the comp there to N'Keal Harry. Bit of an injury bug with him in college, but when healthy, one of the more dynamic players in college football. All right, moving on to the 22nd pick. That would be the Indianapolis Colts, and you have Justin Herbert out of Oregon headed to Indy. Break that one down for us.
So, Tommy, at the beginning of the season, I had him as a top 5 pick. Last season, when we thought he may come out, I had him as the overall top pick, one of my favorite players. Look, he struggled last year with consistency. He came back to school, which was the right move in my mind. And he's been better this year, no question about it. But the problem is, Tommy, we've talked about this before, is the consistency from one play to the next. He can do everything. He can throw the ball out of the stadium and over the mountains like Uncle Rico. But from one play to the next, there are struggles with consistency. We've seen it every week. The good news is last week against USC was his best game of the season. Started slow, only 3 for 7 in the first quarter, but then he went off. 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. That interception came in the first quarter, and there's a lot to love, and that's why teams salivate. I'm still concerned about the week-to-week, play-to-play consistency. So we'll see where he goes from there. But here's the deal. Indianapolis is a fantastic fit. Frank Reich is a fantastic quarterbacks coach. They have Jacoby Brissett under contract for 1 more year. You bring in Justin Herbert, let him sit, don't rush him onto the field. We see it happen every year, and these quarterbacks struggle. And then they can decide in 2021 what the plan is with Brissett, what the plan is with Herbert, and then you have your quarterback of the future that you didn't have to overdraft and who had a chance to learn the system, Tommy T.
It's just interesting because you're talking about a guy that at one point in time last season was talked about being the top overall pick, and it kind of just goes back to show you when you come back for another year, sometimes there's more film, sometimes there's something that stands out. One thing you brought up there in terms of developing a guy like Justin Herbert, and you mentioned Frank Reich, how much confidence would you have in Frank Reich, a fellow quarterback, a guy that knows the offense, to develop a guy, maybe work out some of the things that Justin Herbert lacks right now?
I think that would be a huge development for Justin Herbert instead of going to some place like Miami where there's a lot of upheaval, going some place like Cincinnati where there's a ton of upheaval. Frank Reich The system is set. Chris Ballard is a fantastic general manager. He does a great job of fitting players into the system they want to work with. Frank Reich does a good job of developing these players. We've seen it with Jacoby Brissett, and I think that would be reflected with Justin Herbert as well. Justin Herbert's going to have a ton of expectations. Some of those expectations would be lifted if he falls to the bottom of the first round, and I think it's probably merited right now, given the way he's played over the course of his career, that he is not a top 15 pick. That could obviously change. That will obviously anger some Oregon Ducks fans, but that's reality, and probably in his best interest long term, Tommy, in terms of his NFL career, it makes sense to go to a place where there isn't expectations on a 4-12 team that he has to win right away. You go to a team that wins year in and year out, you're all set with a guy like Frank Reich, who's a fantastic play caller, and as you point out, a former quarterback and works well with quarterbacks. That could be the recipe to a long and prosperous career for Justin Herbert.
All right, moving on to the 21st pick, and we have Dallas here taking Marvin Wilson. What are the prospects of this guy? Of course, plays his ball out in the state of Florida.
Yeah, one of the few bright spots in Florida State for Florida State's team, but he is incredibly fun to watch. He is built like a bowling ball, and I mean that in the most positive sense of the term. You look at him there, and he is one of the best pass rushers in this draft. He does it from inside. He is incredibly quick off the ball. He pushes the pocket. He gets into the backfield consistently, and that's exactly what you want in your playmakers, especially if you're the Cowboys, who have struggled on defense in terms of being consistent from one game to the next. Pass rusher, put him in the middle. Yes, they just got Michael Bennett. We don't know how long he'll be there. You have D-Law on one side, Wilson holding down the middle. You have those linebackers. You might have something there, Tommy. I love this guy a lot.
All right, Marvin Wilson out of Florida State. You have him at number 21 going to the Dallas Cowboys. Now let's put up a group of picks here, 20 through 17. Let's take a look at those and have Ryan kind of break it down for us. When you take us through these four, from T. Higgins to Julian Okwara.
T. Higgins, it's sort of weird to say, but he might be one of the most underrated wide receivers in this draft class. Yes, he plays for Clemson, but this draft class is stacked with wideouts. He's a big wideout, sort of slight, but he is the best high point catcher in this draft and probably one of the best back shoulder catches receivers in this draft. Pair him up with Nick Foles, who looks like he's going to be there for the rest of the season and probably for a few more years. You have D.D. Westbrook and you have DJ Shark. Now you have three legit weapons. Tyler Biadasz would have been a first-round pick if he came out last year, the interior lineman out of Wisconsin. He plays primarily center, but he is so athletic he can play interior guard positions as well. They need to bolster that interior line for whomever is going to be the quarterback. We don't know who that's going to be just yet. A.J. Terrell is T. Higgins' teammate at Clemson. Big cornerback. We see NFL teams going to these big cornerbacks to cover these big wide receivers. Extremely athletic. He can do everything you want him to do as a boundary corner. Played last year at a high level, is playing again at a high level. Guess what? The Eagles secondary has been terrible. Some injuries, some otherwise. Terrell fixes that. And then Julian Okwara out of Notre Dame is a fantastic, mind-blowing athlete. He reminds me a little bit in the sense of Brian Burns out of Florida State last year, not in terms of the way they play so much, but in terms of their size. Brian Burns played at about 234 last year, gained 15 pounds before the combine. He has had a really good rookie season as a first-round pick. Okwara is about 240. He can play at that weight, but he can also add some weight. And this is also a pass rusher, which is much needed for the Dolphins. They have 3 first-round picks. You get a pass rusher. They got Laviska Shenault later in the draft. Now there's one more thing they need to address, and I'm sure we'll get to that a little later, Tommy T.
Yep, the Miami Dolphins there have multiple picks in the first round. A lot like the Oakland Raiders did a season ago. They had 3 in the first round. They took Josh Jacobs, Cleveland Ferrell, and as well Jonathan Abram. Abram, of course, hurt this year, but they went defense with 2 of the 3, also targeted that. Hey, let's talk about the silver and black. At number 16 of our 2020 NFL mock draft, you have them going with defense, Dylan Moses out of Alabama.
Yeah, this guy is so explosive. Unfortunately, in August, he tore his ACL. His season is over. He was my number 1 rated linebacker coming into this draft. The good news is about the ACL injury is that it's an 8 or 9 month recovery period, so he'll be ready in time for the draft if he chooses to declare. So we'll have to wait and see what his plan is, whether he comes back to Alabama or not. But if he comes out, in my mind, he's a first-round pick. We saw Jeffrey Simmons last year out of Mississippi State tear his ACL in February. He was a first-round pick of the Titans. He is already back, and he is already playing at a high level. The Raiders need help on defense. You mentioned the guys, Cleve Farrell and Jonathan Abram, they got last year. This adds an element in the middle of the defense to go along with the guys up front, and in the secondary, they've already added. I love this pick, Tommy. It's just up to whether Dylan Moses decides to return to Alabama or take his game to the NFL.
I think when you grade him as a prospect, the talent's undeniable. He's a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. And you had an example, too, maybe Jalen Smith also an example. Like if he was fully healthy and we weren't talking about an injury, what would be the ceiling for him? Would it be a top 10, maybe a top 5 guy in your eyes?
Yeah, he's a top 10 guy without question. I would have loved to have seen him play this year to get a better idea. But based on what we saw last year, he was one of the best players on that Alabama defense. That included Quinnen Williams. That included Raekwon Davis. That included Mack Wilson, who was drafted by the Browns. It included Deontay Thompson on the back end. He was that good. He was that dynamic. And I feel like if he's fully healthy, and you can come back from ACLs, we see it all the time, he is a top 10 talent. It's just whether these teams are scared off, much in the same way we saw with Jeffrey Simmons, a top 5 talent in my mind, no question, who fell to the middle of the first round. Now the Titans are the beneficiaries of that. So we'll see if there's a team that's interested in going higher. But I feel like if he goes 16, the 15 to 20 range, somewhere to, especially like Oakland, it would be a great get for them and a good fit for Dylan Moses.
All right, you get that potential top 10 talent, and you're getting it with some good value in the teens, as you mentioned, and for Oakland right now in our mock draft at number 16. All right, let's go through 15 and 11 between those multiple picks. So let's take a look at those 5 selections through the next round there in the first round of guys. And when you look at this, Ryan, take us through Tennessee down to Arizona.
So it starts with A.J. EPENESA out of Iowa. Here's the thing, Tommy. He looks like physically like J.J. Watt. His game is not at that level just yet. Last year, he had 10.5 sacks, 16.5 tackles for loss, 4 forced fumbles, and the expectations were through the roof coming into 2019. He hasn't quite done it yet. 3.5 sacks, 3.5 tackles for loss, playing as a full-time player. So we'll have to see how this progresses. But he is a first-round talent. He just has to put it all together, and sometimes it takes time. JEDRICK Wills is a guy I absolutely love. Keep a name on this guy. He plays right tackle for the Crimson Tide right now. The Chargers obviously need help at offensive line. He is built like a truck. He is a monster in the run game. He's only get better as a pass blocker. Keep an eye on him, Tommy. Kristian Fulton is the quarterback out of LSU. One of the most athletic players in this draft. Would have been a first-round pick if he came out last year. The Jags need to replace Jalen Ramsey. Kristian Fulton makes sense there. TREVON Diggs is Stephon Diggs' younger, bigger brother. He is a monster on the outside. He's listed at about 6'2". He looks bigger than that when you see him in person. Again, he adds some help in the secondary for Matt Patricia's defense. I love this kid, and I feel like he's only going to get better. There was some conversation last year he may come out. Injuries have prevented him from doing that, so he returned to Alabama. He's having a really good season. And finally, Grant Delpit, number 11, Kristian Fulton's teammate in the secondary at LSU. Both those guys up for a big test this week against Alabama. He's the best safety in this draft class. Unbelievably athletic on the back end. Hasn't played quite as consistently this year as some people had hoped, but half the season to go. The measurables are off the charts, and he is a top 15 pick in my mind, Tommy.
That's 15 through 11. Now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty with the top 10, and we'll start at number 10, and we have number 9. It's the wide receiver discussion in terms of this mock draft. You got Ceedee Lamb, you got Jerry Jeudy. Let's start at 10. Who do you have at number 10? Is it Lamb or Jeudy?
Number 10, let me double check. I don't want to get you wrong here. The Raiders. Again, we keep talking about the Raiders. This is the perfect Raiders pick. Ceedee Lamb. Pound for pound, Tommy, he is the strongest wide receiver in this draft class. It sounds silly to say because he looks slight, but he breaks tackles like he is Adrian Peterson at Oklahoma. He had a slowish, quote-unquote, start of the season, but he has absolutely gone off. He is averaging 22.7 yards per catch. That is insane, even by Oklahoma big offense standards. And I feel like in the Raiders scheme, with Terrell Williams, with Hunter Renfrow, my guy Hunter Renfrow, Foster Moreau, Darren Waller, suddenly this offense goes from being really good to really, really good. And Ceedee Lamb is a guy you can't miss on, Tommy.
All right, that's pick number 10. You have Ceedee Lamb going to the Raiders. That means Denver at 9 goes with Jerry Jeudy. When you look at him, what stands out to you, and potentially why is that a good fit on the Mile High City?
The most dynamic player in this draft class. He's my number 1 wide receiver right now, just ahead of Ceedee Lamb. Listen, he doesn't run all that fast. He ran 4.53 at Alabama's Pro Day last year. He plays like a 4.2 player. He is unbelievable in small areas. He will juke anyone out of their shoes. I talked to someone in the league, and they actually said this, and Brady Quinn laughed at me, but I'm willing to give it some consideration. He might be the best wide receiver coming out of Alabama ever, and that includes Julio Jones. So chew on that for a little bit. He goes to Denver, where he replaces Manny Sanders. We don't know who will be throwing the ball. It could be Drew Lock. It could be any of the 3 or 4 other quarterbacks that John Elway drafts and or signs in the coming months. But he'll land there. He's a fantastic game-changing talent. where you can put him out there and have very little to worry about at the wide receiver position, Tommy.
Arda, take me through 8 through 6. We're talking about Tampa Bay, Cleveland, and New York, the Giants.
So let's see, at number 8, what do we got? We have Jeff Okudah out of Ohio State, the best cornerback in this draft class. Fantastic in man-to-man, more so than zone, but that's okay. If you're an NFL team, you want to see your cornerbacks play man-to-man. And number 7, Derrick Brown out of Auburn. Absolutely went off against LSU in the first half a week and a half ago, to the point that LSU double-teamed him on virtually every snap in the second half, and he still made plays. He fits into the middle of that defense in Cleveland, where Cleveland suddenly needs help just about everywhere. And then at number 6, you have Tristan Wirfs out of Iowa. He's a junior. It's not clear yet if he's going to come out, but if he does, he's a top 10 talent. He can play right tackle. He can play left tackle. The Giants need help at both positions. Given that Daniel Jones has a propensity to fumble the ball, get Tristan Wirfs in there, help protect your quarterback, and you move on. That's an easy selection, I feel like, if you're Dave Gettleman.
All right, that's 8 through 6. Time for the top 5. At number 5, we know the Falcons have been decimated by injuries, especially on the defensive side, and you have Isaiah Simmons out of Clemson going to the ATL.
Yeah, so he is my number 2 linebacker behind Dylan Moses, but he's also a top 5 safety. We're looking at the Syracuse highlights here. I was watching that game, and one of the things that blew me away as I sat in the press box is that Isaiah Simmons is listed as a linebacker. He played deep safety on a number of snaps, and he was well within, super comfortable doing it. So that's something that NFL teams certainly are aware of. Atlanta has so many issues on defense. Why not draft a guy who can fill about 2 or 3 of those positions? And he's best at those positions than any other player in this draft class. He is an absolute force. Reminds me of a bigger version of Derwin James. He's 2 inches taller, about 15 pounds heavier. I feel like he is going to be so good at the next level. And Atlanta, as I mentioned, has needs there. Why not take a guy who can play linebacker, safety? You can rush him off the edge. Very versatile. Makes a ton of sense, Tommy.
And then let's move on to pick number 4. That's not too far where I am, and that's the Miami Dolphins. They do take a quarterback in our mock draft, and it is Joe Burrow out of LSU.
Yeah, they're not good at tanking for Tua. They actually won a football game, so they dropped him to number 4 in terms of the draft order. But I think you actually may win out by getting Joe Burrow. The issue with Joe Burrow is this, and this is the only issue: experience. He hasn't done this for a long time. Last year, he played like a day 3 pick. This year, new offensive system under Joe Brady, worked hard in the offseason, better arm strength, better decision making. He's the best quarterback in this draft class based on his performance in the 2019 season. We'll see again the test with Alabama, exactly how he feels about pressure. We know Tua can handle pressure, but he'll have to go to Miami. He'll be asked to probably play immediately, and the hope is they can surround him with playmakers to help him. I try to do that in this draft class, but I absolutely love the Joe Burrow story in 2019, given that he came out of nowhere, Tommy. So great story. Going to the transition to Miami might be a difficult one for anyone, but hey, based on what he's done over the last 4 or 5 months, he might be the guy better suited than anyone else.
And you look at that frame, 6'4", 216, and he's got a NFL-type guy as his passing game coordinator, giving a taste what is to come potentially in the NFL. Moving on to the number 3 pick, the New York Jets, trying to get some protection maybe for Sam Darnold, and you've got Andrew Thomas there out of Alabama.
Andrew Thomas does not see ghosts, Tommy. So he has been a standout protecting Jake Fromm forever, and that has not changed this year. Last year, I don't think he gave up a sack in terms of protecting Jake Fromm. Extremely athletic, extremely strong, solid in pass protection, solid in the run game. Everything that the Jets need to get better. They need about 5 or 6 more first-round picks to help Adam Gase fix this offense, but they'll start with Andrew Thomas. Makes a ton of sense. Kelvin Beachum, their left tackle, his contract is up. Get Andrew Thomas, who's an upgrade in every way, and hopefully that helps Sam Darnold focus on football and less so on apparitions. All
right, and I do want to went to Georgia, not Alabama there for Andrew Thomas. Moving on to number 2 pick, we have the Washington Redskins, and they get Chase Young, the edge rusher there out of Ohio State.
Please don't mess this up. This is a layup, Bruce Allen and or Dan Snyder. I'll say it until he is drafted, Tommy. I've been saying this for weeks. If you're a general manager, Chase Young is a guy you can draft and sleep well at night knowing you hit a home run. This is like Nick Bosa last year. It makes a ton of sense in whoever you are if you have the number 1 or number 2 pick. He is arguably the best player in this draft class. We know that NFL teams love quarterbacks, but Chase Young is a monster off the edge. We're watching these Wisconsin highlights. He did more in that Wisconsin game than most players will do their entire NFL college career, He is a monster. Done and done. draft him. Don't overthink it. The only reason you might think about not taking Chase Young if you're the Redskins number 2 is if you trade out of that pick, you get a ton more picks in return. But I would be hard-pressed to pass on someone like this, Tommy.
And then that leaves us with the number 1 pick, and the Bengals have that, and that means they win the Tank for Tua sweepstakes. When you take a look at Tua and him being the number 1 overall pick, why is he that for you?
Well, it came down to him and Joe Burrow, Tommy T, and the difference, as I sort of hinted to earlier, experience. He has done this at a high level year in and year out. The concerns are the injuries. He's had ankle surgeries on both ankles now. He's going to be ready to play this week against LSU. He's supposed to be stronger, so we'll see how that goes. But in terms of everything else, there's so much to like. The arm strength isn't necessarily elite, but he is extremely accurate, short, intermediate, deep balls. He moves well in the pocket. He moves well outside of the pocket. He makes great decisions outside of the pocket. And Cincinnati, we know that the Andy Dalton experiment's done. He's been benched. I suppose they could see Ryan Finley having a good into the final 2 months of the year, the 4th-round pick out of NC State, their rookie. But if you're at the top of the draft board and you have a chance for Tua Tagovailoa, you have to take him if you're the Bengals. This makes things easier for Zach Taylor, the first-year head coach, who has obviously not won a football game. Makes things easier for the rest of your offense. And oh, by the way, you get your first-round pick back, Jonah Williams, the left tackle out of Alabama, who's been injured all year with a shoulder injury. So you go into 2020 with some momentum, higher expectations, and the best quarterback in the draft, Tommy.
All right, that is the first round of the mock draft. And Ryan, before I let you go here, this is why I had Alabama on my mind, even with Andrew Thomas out of Georgia. There's so many Bama guys on this list, and we know recent memory tells us they put guys in the NFL. What stood out to you, obviously, about what Nick Saban is doing and the quality of players that he has, and you have a lot of them pegged here in the first round?
It is nuts. I made a quick list before we started talking, Tommy. I counted 15 guys on both sides of the ball that could be potential day first through 3rd-round picks. In terms of Alabama, they just get guys that come out of nowhere seemingly and just start taking over. Last year was Quentin Williams, who told me at the draft he didn't know if he was going to start the 2018 season. He parlayed that into a top 5 pick. This year you can go up and down the board. You have Raquan Davis, defensive lineman. You have Terrell Lewis, who's been injured for the last 2 years, who could end up being the best defensive player in this draft class for Alabama if he can stay healthy. He is a terror off the edge. He'll be a guy to watch. I mentioned Trevon Diggs in the secondary, Xavier McKinney in the secondary. It goes on and on. Guys like Dylan Moses, who will miss a season and could still be first-round picks. And that's just on the defensive side of the ball. The 2 offensive linemen I mentioned as first-round picks. We know about Tua. We know about the plethora of wide receivers, Tommy. We joke every year that Alabama should play the worst team in the NFL, and we know that they would lose by 50. I feel like this Alabama team would have a good shot against the Bengals to keep it close. Maybe they don't win, but this team is stacked, even by Nick Saban standards.
All right, this mock draft, 8 Alabama players in the first round. Ryan Wilson joining us here on HQ. Ryan, good stuff as always, man. Appreciate it. And check out R-Dub, Will Brinson, and Brady Quinn on the Pick 6 Punt, specifically on Wednesdays. They'll have mock draft updates every single week, getting you ready for the NFL draft next spring.